The card blinked red. Robert Sharp looked at it the way a man looks at a locked door he's been walking through for 20 years and finds, one morning, sealed shut. He tapped it against the reader again. The machine at the gas pump made a sound like a polite apology. A single soft tone, the sound a society makes when it decides to stop pretending you belong in it. The screen read, transaction declined. Unit 7741 RS, please contact Omlink Services. The man behind him in line, a broad fellow in a delivery uniform, cleared his throat. Robert didn't look back. He tapped the card a third time, read again. He drove to work on a quarter tank of gas and spent the entire commute staring at the card where it sat in the cup holder. Cream-colored plastic with his name embossed in silver. The Omlink logo in the corner. A stylized globe being embraced by a circuit line. Corporate warmth weaponized into a trademark. He'd gotten the card 11 years ago. He'd had the same card number his entire adult life. He paid his bills. He'd never missed a payment. He'd never been late. He was, by every measurable metric Omlink tracked, a model citizen of the system. The card blinked red. The Omlink building downtown was the kind of architecture that wanted you to feel small before you'd even gotten to the front door. Glass and steel, 42 floors of it. The kind of clean lines that say we are beyond human error. A man in a suit stood near the entrance helping an elderly woman with her account update. Robert watched them through the glass lobby doors for a moment. The practiced patience of the employee, the small grateful smile of the woman, and then pushed through. The lobby smelled like recycled air and carpet cleaner. A digital display above the reception desk showed a rotating advertisement, Omlink, your life managed. Below it, in smaller text, all transactions, all services, all yours. A server, that was the job title officially, service representative, met Robert at the desk. The man had the face of someone who had been trained extensively to seem like he cared. He wore a headset and had the soft, smooth manner of a person who had resolved too many complaints to feel any particular one very deeply. Good morning, the server said. How can I help you today? Robert set the card on the counter. My card was declined this morning. I don't know why. My account is in good standing. I've never had a problem in 11 years. The server looked at the card, then at his screen and began typing. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency. Robert watched his face for a reaction and found nothing. The server said. He typed more. He made a small sound like something was inconvenient. Sir, your account shows a flag. It looks like a compliance review was initiated on your unit. A compliance review, Robert repeated. Yes, sir. For what? I'm not able to see the reason from this terminal. You'd need to speak with our compliance division. Where is that? 31st floor. The server had already begun looking past Robert toward the next person in line. You'll need to sign in at the elevator bay. They can give you a temporary card for the day if your account status is confirmed as a procedural hold. Robert picked up his card. He turned it over in his hand. It was the same card it had always been. Same weight, same name. He went to 31. The elevator opened onto a floor that looked different from the lobby. Less polished. Actual walls instead of glass. Fluorescent lighting instead of the warm amber downlights below. A woman at a desk near the elevator building security, her badge said, asked him to sign in and checked his ID against a screen. Mr. Sharp, she said, reading. Robert Sharp, 7741 RS. You're scheduled. I didn't schedule anything, Robert said. She looked at the screen. The compliance review scheduled you, she said, in the tone of someone explaining gravity. Please have a seat, he sat. The waiting area had 4 chairs along one wall and a potted plant that was doing its best. 3 other people sat in the chairs. A young woman with a baby on her lap who was staring at a form she'd been given. A middle-aged man in work clothes who had the exhausted posture of someone who had already spent hours here. And an older man who looked like he'd been called in off the street. No coat, still holding a grocery bag. The young woman's baby made a small sound. She bounced it absently, reading. Robert looked at the form she was filling out. It was 12 pages. He waited. 40 minutes later, a man came through the inner door and said Robert's name. His name badge said Compliance Division, and below that, Darryl. Darryl had the manner of a man who worked in a building designed to make people feel small, and had been there long enough that he no longer noticed the effect. He led Robert into a small conference room, a table, 2 chairs, a screen on the wall, and sat down across from him. Your account was flagged for unusual activity, Darryl said, pulling up a file. What unusual activity? On the 14th, there were 3 transactions in a 40-minute period that our system identified as outside your behavioral profile. Robert thought back. I was at the hardware store, then I got lunch, then I bought gas. That's 3 transactions in 40 minutes. Your behavioral profile indicates you don't typically make more than 1 transaction per 40-minute window on weekday afternoons. I was running errands, Robert said. Yes, sir. The system can't distinguish intent. It identified the pattern as anomalous and initiated a compliance review. Until the review is completed, your card is suspended. How long does the review take? Darryl looked at the screen. We have a backlog. Current estimated processing time is 11 to 14 business days. Robert heard the number. He turned it over. 11 to 14 days. You're telling me I can't buy food, gas, medicine, anything for 11 to 14 days because I ran 3 errands. You can apply for a temporary hardship allocation, Darryl said. It covers basic essentials. He pulled out a pamphlet and slid it across the table. With daily transaction limits, you'll need to reapply each morning. Robert picked up the pamphlet. It was printed on paper the color of old milk. Omlink Temporary Access Program. He read the first line. Temporary access is a compassionate service for account holders experiencing compliance review delays. He looked at Darryl. Darryl looked back at him with the expression of a man who had explained this to 200 people, and was neither proud of it nor particularly troubled by it. It was simply the current shape of the world, and Darryl lived in it, and so did Robert. What if I just, Robert said, and stopped. He was going to say what if I just pay cash, but he knew the answer. Currency transfer outside the Omlink system had been phased out 8 years ago. You could still technically hold physical currency, but no vendor was obligated to accept it. Most didn't. The system had made it unnecessary. Then it had made it inconvenient. Then it had simply made it irrelevant. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Darryl asked. Robert looked at the pamphlet. He looked at his card. He looked at Darryl. No, he said. Thank you for your time. He went back down to the lobby. He walked past the rotating advertisement. Your life managed. And out through the glass doors and stood on the sidewalk in the thin October sun. He still had a quarter tank of gas. His friend Ned worked in the building across the street. They'd been friends since college, the kind of friendship that sustains itself on infrequency and honesty. Ned was an electrician now, union work, the kind of job that still paid in something real because the unions had kept physical pay stubs as a contractual requirement. He was one of the few people Robert knew who still kept paper records of everything. Robert called him from the sidewalk. My card's suspended, he said when Ned answered. 11 to 14 days. I have $40 in physical bills in a drawer at home and a quarter tank of gas. There was a silence on the other end that Robert recognized as Ned processing this and trying not to say I told you so. Okay, Ned said. Come over for dinner tonight. We'll figure something out. Ned lived in a part of town that the city planners called a transitional neighborhood, which meant it hadn't been fully networked yet. Older buildings, older infrastructure. Some of the shops still had cash registers, real ones. Though most of them also had Omlink readers at the counter like a second language they'd been made to learn. Ned's apartment was warm and smelled like cooking. His wife Miriam was feeding their daughter, a 4-year-old named Grace, who had opinions about everything. There were books on the shelves, physical books, and a whiteboard in the kitchen where the family tracked grocery needs in marker. Robert sat at the kitchen table and told them the whole thing. The gas pump, the server, the 31st floor, Darryl, the pamphlet. Ned listened with his arms crossed the way he always listened when he was working something out. Miriam set a bowl of soup in front of Robert without asking and sat down. How long has this been building? Ned said. What do you mean? I mean, I've been watching Omlink roll updates to the compliance algorithm for 3 years. Every time it gets more sensitive. Every time the review backlog gets longer. You're not the first person this has happened to. My cousin's wife got flagged last year for buying 2 birthday cakes on the same day. 2 cakes. She was throwing a party. They gave her a temporary hardship allocation, Robert guessed. For 9 days, Ned said. She has 2 kids. She needed insulin for her youngest. The allocation covers 1 pharmacy per day, not specialty medications. She had to drive to 3 different facilities before she found one that would accept the temporary form. Robert stared at his soup. There has to be a process. A real one. An appeals process. There is, Ned said. It takes 30 days minimum, and you need to file it through your Omlink account portal, which you can't access because your card is suspended. They sat with that for a moment. Grace, in her high chair, announced that she didn't want any more carrots. You know what the real problem is, Ned said, leaning forward. The real problem is, it's not malicious. Nobody at Omlink is trying to hurt you. Darryl on 31, he's not a bad guy. He's just a guy doing a job the system gave him. The system didn't intend to strand you, it just doesn't care. It's not capable of caring. It runs on pattern recognition and risk assessment, and nobody ever put care into the parameters. So what do I do? Ned was quiet for a moment. He looked at Miriam. Something passed between them. A look that married people have, the compressed language of shared history. You're going to file the appeal, Ned said. But you're going to do it the hard way. Paper. Physical. Walk it into the building yourself. Can you do that? You can do that, Ned said. The law says you can. Omlink would prefer you didn't, because paper appeals require a human reviewer. And human reviewers take time they'd rather spend on digital queue processing. But the option exists. I looked it up when Maya's cousin went through this. He stood up and went to a drawer in the kitchen, a physical filing drawer, actual folders, and pulled out a printout. It's buried in their terms of service, Section 41, subsection C. Any account holder under compliance review has the right to submit a manual override request with supporting documentation to the Physical Records Office on floor 33. Robert took the printout. He read it. Floor 33, not 31. Floor 31 is the compliance queue. Floor 33 is legacy records. They keep it for regulatory compliance. The government requires that paper appeals remain legally valid. Omlink has to honor them. They just don't advertise it. Robert looked up. Have you done this before? I've helped 3 people do it, Ned said. 2 of them got their cards restored within 48 hours. One of them, he paused. They found an actual error in his file. Wrong unit number cross-referenced from a data migration in 2019. He'd been accruing phantom flags for 6 years and nobody knew. Robert set down the printout. He picked up his soup spoon. He ate, because the food was good and Miriam had made it, and there was something about the act of eating at a friend's kitchen table that steadied a person. Grace dropped a carrot on the floor and looked at it with great scientific interest. I'll need documentation, Robert said. Transaction records, yes. I can print those for you from the public archive. They're technically your data. You're entitled to them regardless of account status. I have a printer. Of course you have a printer. I have 3 printers, Ned said, without any particular pride. One of them is from 1997 and it still works. They worked through the evening. Ned pulled Robert's transaction records from the public access terminal, printed them on actual paper, and they went through every line, 11 years of purchases, every grocery run and gas fill, and pharmacy visit and utility payment, the entire biography of an ordinary person rendered in transaction codes and timestamps. The 3 transactions from the 14th were there, plain as daylight. Northside Hardware, 1422, Downtown Delhi, 1451, Station, 15-3, 3 ordinary things. 3 things any person might do on a free afternoon. The system had looked at them and seen a threat because they didn't match the pattern, because the pattern was built on the absence of spontaneity, because the system had learned to distrust anything that didn't repeat. Robert wrote a statement. 1 page, handwritten, because the manual appeal guidelines specified original handwritten signature on the explanatory letter. He wrote it in plain language. Who he was, what had happened, why the transactions were normal. He signed it at the bottom with a pen that Ned lent him. A good pen, the kind that left clean lines. They assembled the packet at midnight. The statement, the transaction records, the relevant section from the terms of service, a copy of his government-issued ID, and a cover sheet Ned formatted from the manual appeal template. It was the most paper Robert had held in years. He drove home on the last of his gas and put the packet on his kitchen table and sat with it. In the morning he walked. His apartment was 2 miles from downtown. He hadn't walked downtown since he'd gotten his first Omlink card, because there had never been a reason to. You drove, you transacted, you drove home. The city was designed for this. The sidewalks were technically present, but they passed through parking structures and loading zones in the backs of buildings in a way that made clear they were vestigial infrastructure, maintained because some code still required them. He walked anyway. He carried the packet in a folder under his arm. It was cold. The city looked different on foot than it did through a windshield. He passed a woman setting out fruit at a market stall. Real fruit, cash and carry, the kind of small vendor that still existed in the transitional neighborhoods, because the overhead of Omlink integration exceeded what a stall with 12 apples could support. She was arranging oranges with the care of someone who grew them herself. He stopped. He had $40 in his pocket. He bought an orange and ate it while he walked. It cost $2. It was the best thing he'd eaten in 2 days. He got to the Omlink building at 9 in the morning. He went through the lobby. He bypassed the service desk. No card, no transaction, nothing to tap, and went straight to the elevator bay. The building security woman from floor 33 was the same one from floor 31. She looked at him, looked at her screen. "Mr. Sharp, you were here yesterday." "Yes, I'd like to access the physical records office on 33. A pause. She looked at her screen again. She clicked something. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't believe appointments are required for manual appeals submission under Section 41C, Robert said. He put the terms of service printout on her desk. He'd highlighted the relevant paragraph. She read it. She was quiet for a moment. Robert waited. "Give me a minute," she said. She picked up a phone, an actual phone, a handset on a cord, and made a call. She spoke quietly. She looked at Robert twice during the call. She hung up. "33rd floor," she said. "Room 3301. Ask for Ziggy." Room 3301 was not what Robert had expected. He'd expected something like 31. Fluorescent lights, waiting chairs, the atmosphere of bureaucratic erosion. Instead, he found a room lined with filing cabinets. Actual metal filing cabinets, rows of them, and a desk in the center behind which sat a man who could only be Ziggy. He was somewhere in his 50s, wearing a cardigan that had seen better decades, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the expression of a man who found his work genuinely interesting and had long ago stopped being surprised by anything. "Robert Sharp?" Ziggy said, reading from a sticky note the security woman had apparently called ahead to give him. "Yes. You have a manual appeal packet?" "I do." Robert set the folder on the desk. Ziggy opened it. He read with deliberate care, his eyes moving slowly down each page. He turned the transaction records over and examined them. He read the handwritten statement. He looked at the ID. He turned to his computer, a desktop, old enough that it had physical ports Robert hadn't seen in years, and began cross-referencing. Robert stood. There was no chair on his side of the desk. He wondered if this was intentional. "Your unit number," Ziggy said, not looking up. 7741 RS. That's a 2012 registration. "Yes, I've had the same account since then. RS suffix. That's a Richmond Street address block. They migrated that whole block to the new server cluster in 2019. He was typing slowly, with 2 fingers. The way people typed when they'd learned before touch typing was something everyone did. "There it is," he said. He turned the screen to face Robert. Robert looked. He didn't entirely understand what he was seeing, a database entry, field codes, numbers, but Ziggy pointed. "Your unit number." When they migrated the RS block, they created a cross-reference flag. Standard procedure. Supposed to be a one-time duplicate marker resolved automatically. But this one wasn't resolved. It's been sitting in your file since 2019, generating low-level anomaly signals, tiny ones, below threshold, normally would never trigger anything. "But," Robert said, "but Omlink updated their compliance sensitivity threshold in August. Pushed it down 20%, means smaller anomaly clusters now trigger reviews. Your file had 6 years of low-level noise from that migration flag. Under the new threshold, that cluster finally hit the trigger level." He said this with the tone of a man who found the mechanism fascinating and the outcome unfortunate. "So," Robert said, "my card was suspended because of an error in a 2019 data migration. Technically, it was suspended because of the compliance algorithm update. But the root cause is the migration flag, yes. And if I hadn't come up here and filed a paper appeal, the compliance review would have processed in its queue," Ziggy said. "Found the anomalous cluster. Been unable to identify a clear violation. Been unable to find a clear non-violation either, because the flag looks like noise but isn't classified noise. Probably would have been escalated to secondary review. That queue runs about 45 days. Robert looked at the screen. 6 years of invisible accumulation. 6 years of a small error no one could see, waiting for the system to become sensitive enough to notice it and punish it. "Can you fix it?" Robert asked. "I can issue a manual override today," Ziggy said. "Card is restored within 1 business hour after I submit the documentation." "The flag." He turned back to the screen. "I can flag it for correction, but actually removing it from the server cluster database requires a back-end ticket submitted by IT infrastructure. That takes 2 to 3 weeks. But my card, restored today." Ziggy was already pulling out a form. "You'll want to keep a copy of this appeal packet. If the flag isn't fully removed and the system re-triggers, which is unlikely but possible, you can come back here directly." He said that last part with deliberate emphasis. "Come back here directly." Robert understood. The 31st floor would tell you to wait 11 to 14 days. The 33rd floor, if you knew it existed, if you had the section number, if you filed the paper, the 33rd floor could help you. "Thank you," Robert said. "Don't thank me," Ziggy said with a small dry smile. "You did the work, you found the right door." He got the call at 11:14 that morning. A text from Omlink, account restored, Unit 7741 RS. No restrictions. He was sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Omlink building. He'd ordered a coffee when the card was still suspended, using the last of his physical bills. The coffee was hot and the shop was warm, and through the window he could see the Omlink building, all 42 floors of it, glass and steel, and the small globe being embraced by a circuit line. He thought about the 31 people in those waiting chairs on floor 31. The woman with the baby and the 12-page form. The man in work clothes with the exhausted posture. The old man with the grocery bag. He thought about Ned, who kept 3 printers and physical files in a filing drawer and knew what Section 41C said. He thought about Ziggy, alone in a room full of filing cabinets on a floor the system didn't advertise, reading paper documents with 2-finger typing because it was still legally required and because Ziggy, whoever he was, still showed up. He took out his phone and opened the Omlink Community Forum. Public access, no card needed. He created an account. He wrote a post. He wrote, "If your Omlink card is suspended and you're in a compliance review, there is a physical records office on floor 33 of the downtown building. It is not advertised. You can submit a manual appeal under Section 41, subsection C of the Terms of Service. You do not need an appointment. You need your transaction records printed. You can get these from any public access terminal, a handwritten statement, and a copy of your ID. Ask for Ziggy. A human being will look at your file, and they can restore your card the same day." He posted it. Then he sat and drank his coffee. He didn't expect much from the post. He'd put a message in a bottle and thrown it into the digital ocean, and the ocean was very large. But in the 3 hours between posting it and getting home, the post was shared 400 times. By morning it had been shared 60 times. By the end of the week, it had been shared across every major Omlink user forum, 2 national news aggregators, and a legal aid organization that specialized in algorithmic disputes. The legal aid organization pulled up every case of Omlink compliance suspension in the past 18 months and cross-referenced for migration flag errors. They found 4,300 documented cases. Omlink's communications department issued a statement calling the data migration flag a known legacy issue that affected a small number of accounts. The legal aid organization pointed out that 4,300 accounts wasn't a small number, and that the accounts had been suspended for an average of 16 days each, totaling over 68,000 days of suspended access across the affected users. The journalist who covered the story called Robert. He told her everything. He described the gas pump, the server in the ground floor, Daryl on 31, the walk from his apartment in the cold, the orange he bought from the woman on the street, Ziggy and the 2-finger typing, and the room full of filing cabinets. She asked him what he thought the lesson was. He was quiet for a moment, thinking about it. "I think," he said, "that systems are built by people, and sometimes the people who build them forget to put the exit doors in the obvious places. The exit still exists. It has to. Legally there are rules about it, but it gets put on a floor nobody talks about. And the assumption is that nobody will go looking. Because most people don't. Because most people have been told there is no exit, and they believe it, and they wait in the queue. And eventually the queue is so long that the waiting feels like the natural state of things." He paused. The exit was paper. 11 years into a system that had made paper obsolete. The exit was a room full of filing cabinets and a man who still read things carefully. The answer wasn't to burn the system down. It was to know where the exit was. She asked if he was worried about what happened if Omlink removed floor 33. "They can't," he said. "The law requires it. What they'd like is for nobody to know it exists. What they'd prefer is that people wait in the queue and trust the process. The process works, mostly, except when it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the question is whether you know enough to go to the 33rd floor." He thought about the post he'd written, about the 60,000 shares, about the 4,300 flags. "I think a lot of people now know about the 33rd floor," he said. 2 months later, 3 things happened in the same week. Omlink announced a voluntary remediation program for accounts affected by the 2019 migration flag, with immediate card restoration and a processing fee credit for the suspension period. The legal aid organization noted that the announcement came 4 days after they filed a class action filing. The woman in the waiting room, the one with the baby and the 12-page form, posted online about her experience. Her name was Elena. She'd been in the compliance queue for 23 days. She had type 1 diabetes and required insulin. The temporary hardship allocation had covered most of her medication, but not the specific formulation her doctor had prescribed. She'd managed with help from her sister, who drove 2 hours to bring her medication. She hadn't died. She pointed this out herself, without particular drama, as something she felt shouldn't need to be pointed out. She'd found Robert's post on day 18 and gone to floor 33 herself. Her card had been restored in the same afternoon. She ended her post with a question. She wrote, "I am glad the exit exists. I am glad someone told me where it was. I want to know who decided to put it on a floor no one talks about. I want to know if anyone in that building asked before they built the queue whether the people in the queue would be okay while they were waiting. I want to know if anyone looked at the math of 68,000 days and felt anything." Robert read that post and didn't have an answer to give her. He shared it anyway. The third thing that happened that week was that Ned called him on a Friday evening and said he was building a website. "What kind of website?" Robert asked. "A directory," Ned said. "Every legal mechanism, every paper override, every legacy process, inside every major integrated service system that still exists for regulatory compliance but isn't advertised. Every Section 41C. Every Floor 33. That's a big project." "Yes," Ned said. "Miriam's helping. She's better at the legal research than I am." "What are you calling it?" Ned was quiet for a moment. "The exit doors," he said. The directory launched on a Wednesday in November. By Friday, it had 40,000 registered users. By the following month, legal aid organizations in 7 states had contributed verified entries. A paralegal in Minnesota added a section specifically for medical equipment coverage overrides. A retired systems engineer in Oregon contributed an 18-page annotated guide to the data migration error patterns from the 2018-2021 OMLink infrastructure upgrade cycle, with specific unit number ranges most likely to be affected. Robert contributed 1 entry. He wrote it himself carefully in plain language the same way he'd written the handwritten letter. He wrote, "Floor 33, OMLink downtown. Room 3301. Manual appeal under Section 41C. No appointment needed. Bring your transaction records, a handwritten statement, and your ID. A person will read your file. They can restore your card the same day," he added. "Ask for Ziggy. He is good at his job and he will be honest with you." He didn't know if Ziggy would still be there. He didn't know if OMLink would find a reason to move the physical records office, to restructure floor 33 away, to make the exit harder to reach. Systems did this. They evolved around pressure points. They closed gaps that people found their way through. But the law still required the exit to exist. And now a lot of people knew where it was. He submitted the entry. He closed his laptop. He sat in his apartment on a Thursday evening in November, in a city built around a system he lived inside of, and would probably always live inside of. And he thought about the orange he'd eaten on the walk downtown, and the woman who had arranged it on the stall with such care, and the way the cold had felt on his face. He thought about paper, the weight of it, the permanence of ink on a page, the way a physical signature committed you to something in a way that a digital confirmation never quite did. He thought about Ziggy reading his handwritten statement with those deliberate, careful eyes, cross-referencing with 2-finger typing, finding the 2019 flag in a database entry no one had looked at in 6 years. One person, one room, one filing cabinet system that the new world had forgotten to dismantle because the law said it had to stay. He thought about Elena with her insulin and her sister driving 2 hours and her question that he didn't have an answer to. Did anyone look at the math and feel anything? He thought, maybe the answer to that question doesn't fix anything. Maybe the more useful question is, what do you do while you're waiting for the system to feel something? What do you do when you know the exit exists and the person next to you doesn't? You tell them, that was it. That was all of it. You find the floor. You find the room. You find the man with the reading glasses and the 2-finger typing who is still there because the law says someone has to be there. And then you turn around and you tell everyone else where you found him. Robert went to bed. His card was in his wallet, cream-colored plastic, his name in silver. It worked. He'd made sure of it, not because the system had corrected itself, but because he had walked through the cold to the right floor and filled out the right form in the right ink and stood in front of a desk and said, "Here is my documentation. And here is what happened, and here is my name." In the morning he would wake up and the system would still be running. OMLink would still manage all transactions, all services, all life. Yours for a fee. The compliance algorithm would still be running pattern recognition against behavioral profiles, still flagging anomalies, still generating cues. The 31st floor would still have people in its waiting chairs with 12-page forms. The temporary hardship allocation pamphlet would still be printed on paper the color of old milk, and floor 33 would still be there. And Ned's website would still be there. And Elena would still be posting questions that needed to be asked. Robert Sharp fell asleep in a city that had outsourced its care to a machine. And he slept well because he knew where the exit was, and he had made sure that other people knew it too. The card sat in his wallet, cream-colored, his name in silver, and it didn't blink.